Today, I'm going to be breaking down absolutely everything that Ian Garry did to dismantle Carlos Prates. And this doesn't just work for Carlos Prates, this works in almost any orthodox versus southpaw battles, because that's what Ian Garry did so well. He did the fundamentals of the open stance battle. So let me break down exactly what it was that helped him get the unanimous decision over one of the slickest strikers in the 170-pound division. So first and foremost, in the build up to this fight, I said Ian Garry had to take the center and he had to dictate the tempo. So what I mean by that, and what he did so well, is he dictated the striking on his terms. So he was going first. And by doing this early in the fight and by setting the tempo and the rhythm of the fight very early, this meant that Carlos Prates was sat on the outside waiting to pick his shots on Ian Garry's tempo, and this is what really hurt Carlos Prates towards the later rounds. We see this sometimes with people like Chito Vera, who do have legitimate striking and one-punch power and good knockouts with their kicks, their knees and their punches. They find themselves on the outside waiting for that perfect shot and that perfect moment, and eventually it doesn't come and the fight passes them by. So Ian Garry did a great job of standing in the center and then began to hand fight, because this is always the most important thing whenever you have an orthodox striker like Garry and a southpaw like Carlos Prates. It's constantly that probing hand, and this is what Carlos Prates does so well, and this is what Ian Garry did a fantastic job in mitigating. Firstly, he always won the hand battle. So every time that they were fighting for position on the hand, Ian Garry would be the first to initiate the exchanges. So Carlos Prates had to consistently be reactive to everything that was coming towards him. Typically in his fights, he dictates the timing and he's the one going first. But this is what had Carlos guessing. So now he's thinking, what is coming? Is it the straight right? Or is it the high kick? Or is it the teep up the middle, which Ian Garry used to great effect very early on? And we'll come back to the targeting in a second. And I just want to speak a little bit more about the positioning, because typically with strikers, when you have someone that has a very powerful left hand or right hand, you want to circle away from it. And for the most part, this is what Ian Garry did very well. He circled away from the danger, so moving towards his left. But what he also did is when he did circle towards the power side of Carlos Prates, that left side which has knocked so many people out, again, he was the first to initiate the exchanges. So Carlos Prates again was having to be reactive. And then on top of that, what he did, coming back to the targeting, is not only did he mix it up with his strikes, he then mixed it in with the level changes. And this just speaks to the IQ and the understanding of Ian Garry. He knew what he had on his hands, a very high level operator when it came to the striking. So game plan wise, it was always going to be sensible to mix it up. But it wasn't just the fact that he mixed it up, it was the choice of takedown that he used. Because Ian Garry was constantly going to the single leg on that near side, because again, when you have that open stance battle, you have that front leg right in front of you. But also what you get with that is you get a safer avenue to the takedown, because you're not running into traffic of that other leg, or more so with the head on the center line down the middle. So by slipping off to the left like Ian Garry was doing and going for that single leg, it mitigates a lot of the risk of the knees coming up the middle, which is what Carlos Prates does excellently well. And I've heard Brad Pickett break this down for me in training before as well. You always want to avoid that oncoming traffic. So now very early in the fight, Ian Garry is doing multiple things. He's winning the hand fight battle, he's winning the position of the cage, he's keeping the hands occupied of Carlos Prates, and then he's also telling him every time that he initiates in a closer quarters, he could be taken down as well. So that is what helped Carlos Prates be a lot more stagnated than he typically is. Now, I do believe a little part of this was Carlos thinking, I've never been in 5 rounds and I've never got out the first, so maybe a slight reservation of the gas tank, but it also leans to the excellent game planning of Ian Garry, because now, very early on the fight, he set up every single level. So now he had the ability to not only feint and fake different levels, but to get the reactions from Carlos Prates. Because going back to what we said about that footwork, this is another thing that he did so well. Every time that Carlos Prates would set his feet to strike with Ian Garry, that's when he then level changed, just as they slowly got closer in parameters to each other. And that is what Ian Garry did excellently well. Very smart wrestling integration. And coming back to the shot selection, because that's something that I want to talk about a little bit more. We spoke about the need to circle away from the power side. Not necessarily throughout the entire fight, but for the most part, you want to circle away from the power. Now, there's also some other things that you can do to mitigate the power if you're coming against someone who has legitimate knockouts in their hands. And that's beat up the arms and beat up the wrists. And this is what Ian Garry did very well. Not only did he occupy the hands with the high kicks, he also targeted the wrists of Carlos. Because if you look at anyone's arm, for the most part, if they block and defend well with the gloves on and with obviously more conditioned arms and forearms, they're going to be able to take more, especially if they defend it well. But if you target the wrists, it's a lot easier to get those breaks and also just beat up the bones so it takes some of the pop away. So again, coming back to Ian Garry's game planning, he knew exactly what Carlos Prates wanted to do, but he didn't allow it because he would go first and then he would attack the arms, not only to slow them down, but to occupy them as well. So now we've got a world in where Ian Garry is owning the real estate, he's mixing up his targets, he's beating up the arms, and he's mixing in the level changes. So that's the foundations, if you like, of the performance. So as it got later in the rounds, Ian Garry could now build off of this because, like I said, he set the foundations for Carlos Prates. Now he doesn't know if he's going to level change. Now he knows he has to be wary of the punches and the kicks coming up high. And now Ian Garry, in the later rounds, the 3rd, 4th and 5th, is starting to layer up his attack. So this is the next part that I want to speak to. Not only was he manipulating what targets he was going to, but now he was adding in more combinations. So especially off of that lean towards the left side where he was plucking the single leg, and now what he was doing, instead of going for that single leg like Carlos Prates was expecting, he was putting uppercuts off that side, he was putting right hands off that side, and very reminiscent of a sort of Robert Whittaker, he was leaning off to that right side and then putting the head kick over the top. So now he's getting that same look, but with 3 different attacks. And that was something which was really stunning Carlos Prates towards those middle rounds, and exactly what he did so well. And that is what I was very much impressed with. Setting up those foundations early, then complementing them with extended combinations towards the end. And then the last thing that I really want to touch upon with Ian, that he didn't get a ton of opportunities to exploit, but when he did it well, was actually the advancements of Carlos Prates. Ian Garry didn't get to counter-strike a lot because he was always going first. But when Carlos did go first and use some of his patented moves that we've seen so many times throughout his career, like the step-in knee, Ian Garry did a great job of being against the cage, seeing it coming, fading out, and then boom, buzzing in with right hands. So he was capitalizing on the things that Prates was doing as well. So just to recap, when you look at this performance from Ian Garry, I think it was very cerebral, and it speaks to why he's such a problem in this division, because he can strike and he can grapple and he can mix it up with good IQ over 5 rounds. So now when you're facing him, it's not always a case of thinking, okay, this guy's got grappling like Khabib or he's got grappling like GSP. Not yet, at least. But you do have to consider it, because although Carlos Prates did a great job for the most part of reversing position or stuffing the takedown and getting back to his feet, it doesn't really matter. This is the point that sometimes people miss a lot. It doesn't really matter. You don't actually need the takedown. You just need them to think it's coming to then set up your attacks, to get the hands coming a little bit lower for those down blocks, and then boom, you're landing uppercuts, or boom, you're putting the high kick over the top. But just to sort of round that off, when he did get some grappling exchanges in regards to Ian Garry, you could see the time that he spent at Shooter Box, especially with Damian Maia, the way that he's able to sort of find the back these days and get hooks in, he did very well. But on top of that, actually understanding different positions like the wrist ride against the cage. He had Carlos Prates against the cage in the 5th, and he was controlling the wrist nicely, landed a couple of shots. These are just small wrinkles to his game that are very impressive, but more than that, they just get you up on the scorecards. And I think this is a good place to sort of round out, is what Ian Garry did so well was just stay active throughout the fight. It was clean, and it was a very smart performance, and it was game plan excellently, like I mentioned. But very simply, he put more activity out there. He was first, he was peppering shots, and then he stood his ground and added his combinations. He got his takedowns. He landed a couple of shots with his takedowns. In the first round, we saw some really nice ground and pound as well. And that is really one of the main differences, was the activity. When Prates got a little bit more confident in the later rounds and Ian Garry started to slow down, you could see his eyes now light up and he started to put out more numbers. But at that point, it was already too late. Now, like I said, it was his first time going past the first round, so there'll be a ton of experience learnt from there. But this video was about Ian Garry because, again, he shows why he's such an impressive young man in this division. Bearing in mind, he's not even Ye-Sit Pad 28 yet, and he has the title in his crosshairs. To go out and fight Shavkat Rakhmonov on a couple of weeks' notice, to then get the call to fight Carlos Prates on a couple of weeks' notice, bearing in mind that they were the boogeymen for the 170-pound division, get a win over Prates and a very close decision over Shavkat, get on the mic, call out the title shot, and have it made official, because that's already pre-written in your pre-contractual agreement. This man is special. This man is special. Now, he didn't go out and flatline his opponent this time round, but the fact that he's able to build fights, build his future, understand the marketing side of things, understand the business side of things, and understand how to operate the business with the UFC behind the scenes in the contracts and the negotiations. He's someone that is always willing to learn. And he's always a student of whatever he is in. So you may not like his facade or his character. You may not like how he is in the media, but you must respect him, and you must respect his business savvy as well. So the future is very bright for Ian Garry, and I'm very interested to see if there is a weight miss, because if there is, now we have a very interesting conundrum on our hands, where we have a backup fighter who fought quite literally a few days ago. So shout out to Ian Garry for the performance. Shout out to his team for the game plan and, of course, his execution. And it will be fascinating to see what they do with him next if he doesn't get that title shot in a couple of weeks. So before I love you and leave you, let me know if there's any more breakdowns you would like me to do, or any different styles of content. And as always, keep it casual.